everybody, welcome to another ASMR video here on the channel. Now, in my previous ramble video, I mentioned that I want to do more history videos. They are pretty much a staple here on the channel, but I feel we don't do them enough, so for our first proper video of this year, I thought we would do another one. Now, in the last history video, we took a look at the life of Napoleon, and this evening we're going to be taking a look at another ruler's life in Julius Caesar, obviously a very, very famous figure from history. So we're going to be diving into his life this evening, so hopefully you find it informative and relaxing as always. And let's get into it. Julius Caesar was a celebrated Roman general and statesman, the conqueror of Gaul, victor in the civil war of 49 to 45 BC, and dictator 46 to 44 BC. He launched a series of political and social reforms when he was assassinated by a group of nobles in the Senate House on the Ides of March. He is one of the major figures in classical antiquity. Caesar changed the course of history of the Greco-Roman world decisively and irreversibly. The Greco-Roman society has been extinct for so long that most of the names of its great men mean little to the average educated modern person. But Caesar's name, like Alexander's, is still on people's lips throughout the Christian and Islamic worlds. Even people who know nothing of Caesar as a historic personality are familiar with his family name as a title signifying a ruler who is in some sense uniquely supreme or paramount. The meaning of Kaiser in German, Tsar in the Slavonic languages, and Caesar in the languages of the Islamic world. Caesar's clan name, Julius, is also familiar in the Christian world, for in Caesar's lifetime the Roman month, Quintilis, in which he was born, was renamed July in his honour. This name has survived, as has Caesar's reform of the calendar. The old Roman calendar was inaccurate and manipulated for political purposes. Caesar's calendar, the Julian calendar, is still partially enforced in the Eastern Orthodox Christian countries, and the Gregorian calendar, now in use in the West, is the Julian, slightly corrected by Pope Gregory XIII. So we now are going to take a look at his family background and career. So Caesar's gens, the Julii, were patricians, i.e. members of Rome's original aristocracy, which had coalesced in the 4th century BCE with a number of leading plebeian or commoner families to form the nobility that had been the governing class in Rome since then. By Caesar's time, the number of surviving patrician gens was small, and in the gens Julia, the Caesars seem to have been the only surviving family. Though some of the most powerful noble families were patrician blood was no longer a political advantage. It was actually a handicap, since a patrician was debarred from holding the paraconstitutional but powerful office of tribune of the plebs. The Julii Caesars traced their lineage back to the goddess Venus, but the family was not snobbish or conservative-minded. It was also not rich or influential or even distinguished. A Roman noble won distinction for himself and his family by securing election to a series of public offices, which culminated in the consulship. censorship possibly to follow. This was a difficult task for even the ablest and most gifted noble, unless he was backed by substantial family wealth and influence. Rome's victory over Carthage in the Second Punic War had made Rome the paramount power in the Mediterranean basin, and influential Roman noble families' clients, that is, protégés who in return gave their patrons their political support, might include kings and even whole nations, beside numerous private individuals. The requirements and the costs of a Roman political career in Caesar's day were high, and the competition was severe, but the potential profits were of enormous magnitude. One of the prerequisites of the praetorship and the consulship was the government of a province, which gave ample opportunity for plunder. The whole Mediterranean world was, in fact, at the mercy of the Roman nobility, the equites, or knights, which had grown rich on the military contracts and on tax farming. Military manpower was supplied by the Roman peasantry. This class had been partly dispossessed by an economic revolution following on the devastation caused by the Second Punic War. The Roman governing class had consequently come to be hated and discredited at home and abroad. From 133 BCE onward, there had been a series of alternate revolutionary and counter-revolutionary paroxysms. It was evident that the misgovernment of the Roman state and the Greco-Roman world by the Roman nobility could not continue indefinitely, and it was fairly clear that the most probable alternative was some form of military dictatorship, backed by dispossessed Italian peasants who had turned to long-term military service. The traditional competition among members of the Roman nobility for office and the spoils of office was thus threatening to turn into a desperate race for seizing autocratic power. The JULIUS Caesaris did not seem to be in the running. It was true that Sextus Caesar, who was perhaps the dictator's uncle, had been one of the consuls for 91 BC, and Lucius Caesar, one of the consuls for 90 BC, was a distant cousin, whose son and namesake was consul for 64 BCE. In 90 BCE, Rome's Italian allies had seceded from Rome because of the Roman government's obstinate refusal to grant them Roman citizenship, and as consul, Lucius Caesar had introduced emergency legislation for granting citizenship to the citizens of all Italian ally states that had not taken up arms or that had returned to their allegiance. Whoever had been consul in this critical year would have had to initiate such legislation, whatever his personal political preferences. There is evidence, however, that the JULIUS Caesaris, though patricians, had already committed themselves to the anti-nobility party. An aunt of the future dictator had married Gaius Marius, a self-made man who had forced his way up to the summit by his military ability, and had made the momentous innovation of recruiting his armies from the dispossessed peasants. The date of Caesar the Dictator's birth has long been disputed. The date was July 12th or 13th. The traditional year is 100 BCE, but if this date is correct, Caesar must have held each of his offices 2 years in advance of the legal minimum age. His father, Gaius Caesar, died when Caesar was about 16. His mother, Aurelia, was a notable woman, and it seems that he owed much to her. In spite of the inadequacy of his resources, Caesar seems to have chosen a political career as a matter of course. From the 69 BCE, though sufficient power to impose his will, as he was determined to do, proved to mean monarchical power. In 84 BCE, Caesar committed himself publicly to the radical side by marrying Cornelia, a daughter of Lucius Cornelius Cinna, a noble who was Marius's associate in revolution. In 83 BCE, Lucius Cornelius Sulla returned to Italy from the east and led the successful counter-revolution of 83 to 82 BCE. Sulla then ordered Caesar to divorce Cornelia. Caesar refused and came close to losing not only his property, but his life as well. He found it advisable to remove himself from Italy and to do military service, first in the province of Asia and then in Cilicia. In 78, after Sulla's death, he returned to Rome and started on his political career in the conventional way, by acting as a prosecuting advocate, of course, in his case against prominent Sullan counter-revolutionaries. His first target, Gnaeus Cornelius Dolabella, was defended by Quintus Hortensius, the leading advocate of the day, and was acquitted by the extortion court jury, composed exclusively of senators. Caesar then went to Rhodes to study oratory under a famous professor, Molon. En route he was captured by pirates. Caesar raised his ransom, raised a naval force, captured his captors, and had them crucified. All this as a private individual holding no public office. In 74 BCE, with Mithridates VI Eupator, king of Pontus, renewed war on the Romans, Caesar raised a private army to combat him. In his absence from Rome, Caesar was made a member of the Politico-Ecclesiastical College of Pontifices, and on his return he gained one of the elective military tribuneships. Caesar now worked to undo the Sullan constitution in cooperation with Pompey, or Gnaeus Pompeius, who had started his career as a lieutenant of Sulla, but had changed sides since Sulla's death. In 69 or 68 BCE, Caesar was elected quaestor, the first rung on the Roman political ladder. Apologies if my pronunciations are off, it's been a very, very long time since I studied the Roman Empire. In the same year, his wife Cornelia and his aunt Julia, Marius's widow, died. In public funeral orations in their honour, Caesar found opportunities for praising Cinna and Marius. Caesar afterward married Pompeia, a distant relative of Pompey. Caesar served his quaestorship in the province of Farther Spain, modern Andalusia and Portugal. Caesar was elected one of the Girol Aediles for 65 BC, and he celebrated his tenure of this office by unusually lavish expenditure with borrowed money. He was elected Pontifex Maximus in 63 by a political dodge. By now, Caesar had become a controversial political figure. After the suppression of Catilin's conspiracy in 63, Caesar, as well as the millionaire Marcus Licinius Crassus, was accused of complicity. It seems unlikely that either of them had committed themselves to Catilin, but Caesar proposed in the Senate a more merciful alternative to the death penalty, which the consul Cicero was asking for the arrested conspirators. In the uproar in the Senate, Caesar's motion was defeated. Caesar was elected a praetor for 62 BCE. Toward the end of the year of his praetorship, a scandal was caused by Publius Clodius in Caesar's house at the celebration there of the rites, for women only, of Bona Dea, a Roman deity of fruitfulness both in the earth and in women. Caesar consequently divorced Pompeia. He obtained the governorship of Farther Spain for 61 to 60 BCE. His creditors did not let him leave Rome until Crassus had gone bail for a quarter of his debts, but a military expedition beyond the northwest frontier of his province enabled Caesar to win loot for himself as well as for his soldiers. With a balance left for the treasury, this partial financial recovery enabled him and his return to Rome in 60 BCE to stand for the consulship in the year 59. So moving on to the next section, which is titled The First Triumvirate and the Conquest of Gaul. The value of the consulship lay in the lucrative provincial governorship to which it would normally lead. On the eve of the consular elections for 59 BCE, the Senate sought to allot to the two future consuls for 59 BCE as their proconsular provinces the unprofitable supervision of forests and cattle trails in Italy. The Senate also secured by massive bribery the election of anti-Caesarian Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, but they failed to prevent Caesar's election as the other consul. Caesar now succeeded in organising an irresistible coalition of political bosses. Pompey had carried out his mission to put the East in order with notable success, but after his return to Italy and his disbandment of his army in 62, the Senate had thwarted him, particularly by preventing him from securing land allotments for his veterans. Caesar, who had assiduously cultivated Pompey's friendship, now entered into a secret pact with him. Caesar's masterstroke was to persuade Crassus to join the partnership, the so-called Triumvirate. Crassus, like Pompey, a former lieutenant of Sulla, had been one of the most active of Pompey's obstructors so far. Only Caesar, on good terms with both of them, was in a position to reconcile them. Early in 59 BCE, Pompey sealed his alliance with Caesar by marrying Caesar's only child, Julia. Caesar married Calpurnia, daughter of Lucius Piso, who became consul in 58 BCE. As consul, Caesar introduced a bill for the allotment of Roman public lands in Italy, on which the first charge was to be a provision for Pompey's soldiers. The bill was vetoed by 3 tribunes of the plebs, and Caesar's colleague Bibulus announced his intention of preventing the transaction of public business by watching the skies for portents whenever the public assembly was convened. Caesar then cowed the opposition by employing some of Pompey's veterans to make a riot, and the distribution was carried out. Pompey's settlement of the East was ratified en bloc by an act negotiated by an agent of Caesar, the tribune of the plebs, Publius Vatinius. Caesar himself initiated a non-controversial and much-needed act for punishing misconduct by governors of provinces. Another act negotiated by Vatinius gave Caesar Cisalpine Gaul, which is between the Alps, the Apennines, and the Adriatic, and Illyricum. His tenure was to last until February 28, 54 BCE, when the governor designate of Transalpine Gaul suddenly died. This province was also assigned to Caesar at Pompey's instance. Cisalpine Gaul gave Caesar a military recruiting ground. Transalpine Gaul gave him a springboard for conquests beyond Rome's northwest frontier. Between 58 and 50 BCE, Caesar conquered the rest of Gaul up to the left bank of the Rhine and subjugated it so effectively that it remained passive under Roman rule throughout the Roman civil wars between 49 and 31. This achievement was all the more amazing in light of the fact that the Romans did not possess any great superiority in military equipment over the North European barbarians. Indeed, the Gallic cavalry was probably superior to the Roman, horseman for horseman. Rome's military superiority lay in its mastery of strategy, tactics, discipline, and military engineering. In Gaul, Rome also had the advantage of being able to deal separately with dozens of relatively small, independent and uncooperative states. Caesar conquered these piecemeal, and the concerted attempt made by a number of them in 52 BCE to shake off the Roman yoke came too late. Great though this achievement was, its relative importance in Caesar's career and in Roman history has been overestimated in Western tradition. In Caesar's mind, his conquest of Gaul was probably carried out only as a means to his ultimate end. He was acquiring the military manpower, the plunder, and the prestige that he needed to secure a free hand for the prosecution of the task of reorganizing the Roman state and the rest of the Greco-Roman world. This final achievement of Caesar's looms much larger than his conquest of Gaul, when it is viewed in the wider setting of world history, and not just in the narrower setting of the Greco-Roman civilization's present daughter civilization in the West. In 58 BCE, Rome's northwestern frontier, established in the year 125, ran from the Alps down the left bank of the upper Rhone River to the Pyrenees, skirting the southeastern foot of the Cevennes and including the upper basin of the Garonne River, without reaching the Gallic shore of the Atlantic. In 58 BC, Caesar intervened beyond this line, first to drive back the Helvetii, who had been migrating westward from their home in what is now central Switzerland. He then crushed Ariovistus, a German soldier of fortune from beyond the Rhine. In 57, Caesar subdued the distant and warlike Belgic group of Gallic peoples in the north, while his lieutenant Publius Licinius Crassus subdued what are now the regions of Normandy and Brittany. In 56, the Veneti, in what is now southern Brittany, started a revolt in the northwest that was supported by the still unconquered Morini on the Gallic coast of the Strait of Dover, and the Menapii along the south bank of the lower Rhine. Caesar reconquered the Vetani with some difficulty and treated them barbarously. He could not finish off the conquest of the Morini and the Menapii before the end of the campaigning season of 56 BCE, and in the winter of 56 to 55, the Menapii were temporarily expelled from their home by two immigrant German peoples, the Usipetes and the Tencteri. These peoples were exterminated by Caesar in 55 BC. In the same year, he bridged the Rhine just below Koblenz to raid Germany on the other side of the river, and then crossed the Channel to raid Britain. In 54, he raided Britain again and subdued serious revolt in northeastern Gaul. In 53, he subdued further revolts in Gaul and bridged the Rhine again for a second raid. The crisis of Caesar's Gallic War came in 52 BC. The peoples of central Gaul found a national leader in the Arvernian Vercingetorix. They planned to cut off the Roman forces from Caesar, who had been wintering on the other side of the Alps. They even attempted to invade the western side of the old Roman province of Gallia Transalpina. Vercingetorix wanted to avoid pitched battles and sieges and to defeat the Romans by cutting off their supplies, partly by cavalry operations and partly by scorched earth. But he could not persuade his countrymen to adopt this painful policy wholeheartedly. The Bituriges insisted on standing siege in their own Avaricum, and Vercingetorix was unable to save it from being taken by storm within 1 month. Caesar then besieged Vercingetorix in Gergovia near modern Clermont-Ferrand. A Roman attempt to storm Gergovia was repulsed and resulted in heavy Roman losses, the first outright defeat that Caesar had suffered in Gaul. Caesar then defeated an attack on the Roman army on the march, and was thus able to besiege Vercingetorix in Alesia, to the northwest of Dijon. Alesia, like Gergovia, was a position of great natural strength, and a large Gallic army came to relieve it, but this army was repulsed and dispersed by Caesar, and Vercingetorix then capitulated. During the winter of 52 to 51 BC, and the campaigning season of 51, Caesar crushed a number of sporadic further revolts. The most determined of these rebels were the Bellovaci, between the rivers Seine and Somme, around Beauvais. Another rebel force did siege in the south of the natural fortress of Uxellodunum until its water supply gave out. Caesar had the survivors' hands cut off. He spent the year 50 BC in organising the newly conquered territory. After that, he was ready to settle his accounts with his opponents at home. And that brings us on to our next section, antecedents or antecedents. I think it's antecedents. And outcome of the Civil War of 49 to 45 BC. So during his conquest of Gaul, Caesar had been equally busy in preserving and improving his position at home. He used part of his growing wealth from Gallic loot to hire political agents in Rome. Meanwhile, the cohesion of the Triumvirate had been placed under strain. Pompey had soon become restive toward his alarmingly successful ally Caesar, as had Crassus toward his old enemy Pompey. The alliance was patched up in April 56 at a conference at Lucca, just inside Caesar's province of Cisalpine Gaul. It was arranged that Pompey and Crassus were to be the consuls for 55 BC, and were to get laws promulgated prolonging Caesar's provincial commands for another 5 years, and giving Crassus a 5-year term in Syria, and Pompey a 5-year term in Spain. These laws were duly passed. Crassus was then eliminated by an annihilating defeat at the Parthians' hands in 53. The marriage link between Pompey and Caesar had been broken by Julius' death in 54. After this, Pompey irresolutely veered further and further away from Caesar, until when the breach finally came, Pompey found himself committed to the nobility's side, though he and the nobility never trusted each other. The The issue was whether there should or should not be an interval between the date at which Caesar was to reign his provincial governorships, and therewith the command over his armies, and the date at which he would enter his proposed second consulship. If there were to be an interval, Caesar would be a private person during that time, vulnerable to attack by his enemies. If prosecuted and convicted, he would be ruined politically and might possibly lose his life. Caesar had to make sure that, until his entry on the second consulship, he should continue to hold at least one province, with the military force to guarantee his security. The issue had already been the object of a series of political manoeuvres and counter-manoeuvres at Rome. The dates on which the issue turned are all in doubt. As had been agreed at Lucca in 56, Caesar's commands had been prolonged for 5 years, apparently until February 28, 49, but this is not certain. In 52, a year in which Pompey was elected sole consul and given a 5-year provincial command in Spain, Caesar was allowed by a law sponsored by all 10 tribunes to stand for the consulship in absentia. If he were to stand in 49 for the consulship for 48 BC, he would be out of office, and therefore in danger during the last 10 months of 49 BC. As a safeguard for Caesar against this, there seems to have been an understanding, possibly a private one at Lucca in 56 between him and Pompey, that the question of a successor to Caesar in his commands should not be raised in the Senate before the 1st of March, year 50. This manoeuvre would have ensured that Caesar would retain his commands until the very end of 49 BCE. However, the question of replacing Caesar was actually raised in the Senate a number of times from 51 BCE onward. Each time Caesar had the dangerous proposals vetoed by tribunes of the plebs who were his agents, particularly Gaius Scribonius Curio in 50 BC and Mark Antony in 49. The issue was brought to a head by one of the consuls for 50 BCE, Gaius Claudius Marcellus. He obtained resolutions from the Senate that Caesar should lay down his command, but that Pompey should not lay down his command simultaneously. Curio then obtained on the 1st of December year 50 a resolution that both men should lay down their commands simultaneously. Next day, Marcellus, without authorization from the Senate, offered the command over all troops in Italy to Pompey, together with the power to raise more, and Pompey accepted. On January 1st, 49, the Senate received from Caesar a proposal that he and Pompey should lay down their commands simultaneously. Caesar's message was peremptory, and the Senate resolved that Caesar should be treated as a public enemy if he did not lay down his command by a date to be fixed. On July 10th to the 11th, 49 BCE, Caesar led his troops across the little river Rubicon, the boundary between his province of Cisalpine Gaul and Italy proper. He thus committed his first act of war. This was not, however, the heart of the matter. The actual question of substance was whether the misgovernment of the Greco-Roman world by the Roman nobility should be allowed to continue, or whether it would be replaced by an autocratic regime. Either alternative would result in a disastrous civil war. The subsequent partial recuperation of the Greco-Roman world under the Principate suggests, however, that Caesarism was the lesser evil. The civil war was a tragedy, for war was not wanted by either Caesar or by Pompey, or even by a considerable part of the nobility. Roman citizen body ardently hoped for the preservation of peace. By this time, however, the three parties that counted politically were all entrapped. Caesar's success in building up his political power had made the champions of the old regime so hostile to him that he was now faced with a choice between putting himself at his enemy's mercy or seizing the monopoly of power at which he was accused of aiming. He found that he could not extricate himself from this dilemma by reducing his demands, as he eventually did, to the absolute minimum required for his security. As for Pompey, his growing jealousy of Caesar had led him so far toward the nobility that he could not come to terms with Caesar again without loss of face. The first bout of the civil war moved swiftly. In 49 BC, Caesar drove his opponents out of Italy to the eastern side of the Straits of Otranto. He then crushed Pompey's army in Spain. Toward the end of the year, he followed Pompey across the Adriatic Sea and retrieved a reverse at Dyrrhachium by winning a decisive victory at Pharsalus on August 9, 48 BC. Caesar pursued Pompey from Thessaly to Egypt, where Pompey was murdered by an Osmer of King Ptolemy. Caesar wintered in Alexandria, fighting with the populace and dallying with Queen Cleopatra. In 47, he fought a brief local war in northeastern Anatolia with Pharnaces, king of the Cimmerian Bosporus, who was trying to regain Pontus, the kingdom of his father Mithridates. Caesar's famous words, Veni, Vidi, Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered, are his own account of this campaign. Caesar then returned to Rome, but a few months later. Now with the title of dictator, he left for Africa, where his opponents had rallied. In 46 he crushed their army at Thapsus and returned to Rome, only to leave again in November for farther Spain to deal with a fresh outbreak of resistance, which he crushed in March at Munda. He then returned to Rome to start putting the Greco-Roman world in order. He had less than a year's grace for this huge task of reconstruction before his assassination in 44 BC in the Senate House of Rome on March 15th. Caesar's death was partly due to his clemency and impatience, which in combination were dangerous for his personal security. Caesar had not hesitated to commit atrocities against barbarians when it had suited him, but he was almost consistently magnanimous in his treatment of his defeated Roman opponents. Thus clemency was probably not just a matter of policy. Caesar's earliest experiences in his political career had been Sulla's implacable persecution of his defeated domestic opponents. Caesar amnestied his opponents wholesale and gave a number of them responsible positions in his new regime. Gaius Cassius Longinus, who was the moving spirit in the plot to murder him, and Marcus Junius Brutus, the symbolic embodiment of Roman republicanism, were both former enemies. Et tu, Brute, you do, Brutus, was Caesar's expression of his particular anguish at being stabbed by a man whom he had forgiven, trusted, and loved. There were, however, also a number of ex-Caesarians among the 60 conspirators. They had been goaded into this volte-face by the increasingly monarchical trend of Caesar's regime, and perhaps at least as much by the aristocratic disdain that inhibited Caesar from taking any trouble to sugar the bitter pill. Some stood to lose rather than to gain, firstly by the removal of the autocrat who had made their political fortunes. But even if they were acting on principle, they were blind to the truth regime if its destruction had not been long overdue. They also failed to recognise that by making Caesar a martyr, they were creating his posthumous political fortune. If Caesar had not been murdered in 44 BC, he might have lived on for 15 or 20 years. His physical constitution was unusually tough, though in his last years he had several epileptic seizures. What would he have done with this time? The answer can only be guessed from what he did do in the few months available. He found time in the year 46 to reform the Roman calendar. In 45 he enacted a law laying down a standard pattern for the constitutions of the Municipia, which were by his time the units of local self-government in most of the territory inhabited by Roman citizens. In 59, Caesar had already resurrected the city of Capua, which the Republican Roman regime more than 150 years earlier had deprived of its jurisdictional corporate responsibility. He now resurrected the other two great cities, Carthage and Corinth, that his predecessors had destroyed. This was only a part of what he did to resettle his discharged soldiers and the urban proletariat of Rome. He was also generous in granting Roman citizenship to aliens. He increased the size of the Senate and made its personnel more representative of the whole Roman citizenry. At his death, Caesar was on the point of starting out on a new military campaign to avenge and retrieve Crassus's disastrous defeat in 53 by the Parthians. Would Caesar have succeeded in recapturing for the Greco-Roman world the extinct Seleucid monarchies lost dominions east of the Euphrates, particularly Babylonia? The fate of Crassus's army had shown that the terrain in northern Mesopotamia favoured Parthian cavalry against Roman infantry. Would Caesar's military genius have outweighed this handicap? And would Rome's hitherto inexhaustible reservoir of military manpower have sufficed for this additional call upon it? Only guesses are possible, for Caesar's assassination condemned the Romans to another 13 years of civil war, and Rome would never again possess sufficient manpower to conquer and hold Babylonia. So to finish off, we're going to take a little bit of a look at the personality and reputation of Julius Caesar. So Caesar was not and is not lovable. His generosity to defeated opponents, magnanimous though it was, did not win their affection. He won his soldiers' devotion by the victories that his intellectual ability applied to warfare brought them. Yet though not lovable, Caesar was and is attractive, indeed fascinating. His political achievement required ability, in effect amounting to genius, in several different fields, including administration and generalship, besides the minor arts of wire-pulling and propaganda. In all these, Caesar was a supreme virtuoso. But if he had not also been something more than this, he would not have been the supremely great man that he undoubtedly was. Caesar was great beyond, and even in conflict with, the requirements of his political ambition. He showed a human spiritual greatness in his generosity to defeated opponents, which was partly responsible for his assassination. Another field in which Caesar's genius went far beyond the requirements of his political ambition was his writings. Of these, his speeches, letters and pamphlets are lost. Only his accounts of the Gallic War and the Civil War survived. Caesar ranked as a masterly public speaker in an age in which he was in competition first with Hortensius and then with Cicero. Caesar's speeches and writings, lost and extant, apparently served political purposes. He turned his funeral orations for his wife and for his aunt to account for political propaganda. His accounts of his wars are subtly contrived to make the unsuspecting reader see Caesar's acts in the light that Caesar chooses. The accounts are written in the form of terse, dry, factual reports that look impersonal and objective, yet every recorded fact has been carefully selected and presented. As for the lost Anticato, a reply to Cicero's eulogy of Caesar's dead opponent Marcus Porcius Cato, it is a testimony to Caesar's political insight that he made the time to write it, in spite of the overwhelming military, administrative, and legislative demands on him. He realized that Cato, in giving his life for his cause, had made himself posthumously into a much more potent political force than he had ever been in his lifetime. Caesar was right from his point of view to try to put salt on Cato's tail. He did not succeed, however. For the next 150 years, Cato the martyr continued to be a nuisance, sometimes a menace to Caesar's successors. The mark of Caesar's genius in his writings is that though they were written for propaganda, they are nevertheless of outstanding literary merit. A reader who has seen through their prosaic purpose can ignore it and appreciate them as splendid works of art. Caesar's most amazing characteristic is his energy, intellectual and physical. He prepared his 7 books on the Gallic War for publication in 51, when he still had serious revolts in Gaul on his hands, and he wrote his books on the Civil War and his Anticato in the hectic years between 49 and 44. His physical energy was of the same order. For instance, in the winter of 57 to 56 BC, he found time to visit his 3rd province, Illyria, as well as Cisalpine Gaul, and in the interval between his campaigns of 55 and 54, he transacted public business in Cisalpine Gaul, and went to Illyria to settle accounts with the Piristei, a turbulent tribe in what is now Albania. In 49 BCE, he marched within a single campaigning season from the Rubicon to Brundusium and from Brundisium to Spain. At Alexandria, probably aged 53, he saved himself from sudden death by his prowess as a swimmer. Caesar's physical vitality perhaps partly accounts for his sexual promiscuity, which was out of the ordinary even by contemporary Greek and Roman standards. It was rumoured that during his first visit to the East, he had homosexual relations with King Nicomedes of Bithynia. The rumour is credible, though not proved, and was repeated throughout Caesar's life. There is no doubt of Caesar's heterosexual affairs, many of them with married women. Probably Caesar looked upon these as trivial recreations, yet he involved himself at least twice in escapades that might have wrecked his career. If he did in fact have an affair with Pompey's wife Mucia, he was risking his entente with Pompey. A more notorious, though not quite so hazardous affair with his liaison with Cleopatra. By dallying with her at Alexandria, he risked losing what he had just won at Pharsalus. By allowing her to visit him in Rome in 46, he flouted public feeling and added to the list of tactless acts that, cumulatively, goaded old comrades and amnestied enemies into assassinating him. The cool-headed man of genius with an erratic vein of sexual exuberance undoubtedly changed the course of history at the western end of the world. Caesar substituted for the Roman oligarchy an autocracy that could never afterward be abolished. If he had not done this when he did it, Rome and the Greco-Roman world might have succumbed to barbarian invaders in the west and to the Parthian Empire in the east. The prolongation of the life of the Greco-Roman civilization had important historical effects. Under the Roman Empire, the Near East was impregnated with Hellenism for 6 or 7 more centuries. But for this, the Hellenic element might not have been present in sufficient strength to make its decisive impact on Christianity and Islam. Gaul, too, would have sunk deeper into barbarism when the Franks overran it, if it had not been associated with the civilized Mediterranean world for more than 500 years, as a result of Caesar's conquest. Caesar's political achievement was limited. Its effects were confined to the western end of the Old World and were comparatively short-lived by Chinese or ancient Egyptian standards. The Chinese state founded by Qin Shi Huang in 3rd century BC still stands, and its future may still be greater than its past. Yet, even if Caesar should prove to be of lesser stature than this Chinese colossus, he would still remain a giant by comparison with the common run of human beings. And that, my friends, is the history of Julius Caesar. Got a little bit weird at the end there, basically saying that Caesar's just a massive shagger, but was quite good at fighting and quite good at politics. That is essentially the bottom line, and he didn't discriminate genders, so very forward thinking, really. But definitely a super interesting life, and one that has left ramifications on the world we live in today. You would be forgiven for not understanding a load of those words. Some of them have given me flashbacks to university, and some of them I was still unfamiliar with what they meant, but I carried on regardless. But that's what tends to happen with the old history. But hopefully you found it interesting nonetheless. As always, any suggestions for historical events, wars, people you'd like to see covered here on the channel, please let me know down below. I've got like a right mix of people already on the to-do list. I've got like from Freddie Mercury to Mary Queen of Scots to Lionel Messi to Martin Luther King. I've never done a Martin Luther King video. And then we got loads of events we still haven't done, like the Troubles in Ireland and Industrial Revolution, French Revolution, although we kind of, I know Napoleon's after that, so yeah, still plenty of history to come, but be sure to let me know down below what you would like to listen to and watch. But that is going to do it for this evening's video. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, if you did enjoy this video and you've made it this far,